mainly in the transport sector, but now at EWE, we are a bit more focused on industry. I'll show you later on. And in this slides, I want to show you some aspects about demand and supply. So we start on the demand side, just have a look at what will be the demand for hydrogen in Germany, and then later on we will see what is the supply options, right? So as far as I know, you've heard already about import and domestic production, and that are basically two pillars for Germany and for hydrogen supply in Germany. So maybe a few words on EWE. So EWE is actually owned 75% by municipalities, so it's basically a public entity, and we are responsible for energy supply in the northwest of Germany, so very close to the in our region. We see high potentials for hydrogen production. You will see that later on as well. And we are active in gas supply, so everything which is connected to infrastructure and energy, right? So yeah, for us, I think we have a good starting point for hydrogen because we can combine these two worlds like gas and electricity, right? So when we want to start a hydrogen economy, maybe you know the most challenging thing actually is that we have to ramp up like everything at the same time step, right? So we have to start at the customer side, so we have to make sure that we have a sufficient demand for hydrogen. Then we have to always consider the infrastructure, very important infrastructure. So the midstream part, which means pipelines, storage, and then of course the supply side, right? And when it comes to competitive hydrogen supply, it's very important that we have to really ramp up and really go to scale, large scale, right? So when it comes to infrastructure, for us it's more about really large scale infrastructure, large scale underground carbon storage, large scale hydrogen production plants. So in the end, that is the key to competitive hydrogen, right? So when I speak about demand, we see, or we hopefully will see a demand in industry and transport. Maybe you know that hydrogen actually started more in the transport sector, but today it's really much more about the industry sector, because industry has a much higher demand for hydrogen, and that leads to this, what I just mentioned, the scaling up of infrastructure, right? So it's easier for us to address industries, because then scaling up is much easier compared to transport. And if you do that, especially for domestic production, but I will give you some remarks on that as well, you have to consider storage, right? Because in the end, it's about flexible hydrogen production, especially when it comes to domestic production, but for import as well. So structuring the hydrogen supply, that's very important. So storage is something we have to consider right from the beginning, okay? And then when I speak about domestic production, especially in Germany, we usually speak about electrolysis, so mainly about producing hydrogen from renewable energies. And then import could be something else, but for domestic production, it's basically about electrolysis, right? So to understand the strategy, not only EWE strategy, but that's basically the strategy in Germany to get to the, let's say, big hydrogen economy. So we start more on the upstream part, on the production side, on the domestic market. So that is the starting point, right? To create first business cases with domestic production. And then for upstream, we go more and more into the import options, right? So in the end, it's a combined world of import and domestic production. For midstream, as I said, we are starting more on the decentralized systems, but we have to come to large-scale infrastructure, transport, storage as well. That means we are going more to the, you know, comparable to the conventional world like pipelines, underground storage facilities, something like that, right? And again, downstream, starting on the mobility sector, and then industry will step in, and we see large-scale industry players will step in from, let's say, 2025, 2026. So our projection is that we think from 2026 on, we will see an increase in the demand on the demand side. And as well on the production side. And then maybe in the 30s or something, we can consider electricity, stuff like that later on. It's more challenging to get business cases for that. So basically starting on industry is something we think should be the key now for the first ramp up. So where are we today when it comes to the supply side and the demand side? So just to give you the numbers, in Germany, we already have demand for hydrogen. It's around roughly, I would say, roughly 55 terawatt hours of gray hydrogen, mainly for industries, for refineries and stuff like that. And today we have a supply of 0.1 terawatts green hydrogen, right? So when it comes to green hydrogen, we are right at the starting point. There's actually no real green hydrogen in our system today, right? But again, we already have demand 55 terawatt hours for gray hydrogen. And these demands, when it comes to green hydrogen, usually we speak about decarbonization, right? So it's basically about, you know, getting rid of natural gas, coal, something like that, and substitute that with green hydrogen. But another very important aspect especially for domestic production, we see more and more a demand for structuring the energy system, right? So more and more structuring electricity, the electricity side. So when it comes to domestic production, that is very important to consider that we not only want to use domestically produced hydrogen for decarbonization, but to structure the energy system, right? So that is, I would say, a second case for the entire business case, that we can structure electricity, right? All right, so when it comes to the demand side, I just mentioned, first thing is very important. These are the numbers for Europe, and it's the source from the German Hydrogen Council, so Nationaler Wasserstoffrat in German, the German Hydrogen Council, basically. And as you can see, hydrogen gets more and more important when it comes to high rates of decarbonization, right? When you go to 100% decarbonized, no, it's back, right? Okay. So when you go to 100% decarbonized energy systems, then hydrogen is crucial, right? So we will see related to the decarbonization rate, more and more hydrogen in the system, right? So we can start with low shares of hydrogen, and then later on, especially when it comes to 100%, the demand is much higher compared to low carbon targets. This one is for the German market and the perspective for hydrogen demand until 2035. And that's the last pillar you can see there. So as I said, we already have 55 terawatt hours of gray hydrogen, as I said, in refineries, for example. As you can see, as I said, from 2026, we will see an increase in demand, right? Because industry and mobility switch more and more to hydrogen. But, and that's very important, still, we will see the demand for gray hydrogen, right? So it's not that gray hydrogen is substituted by green hydrogen. It stays at the same level as the gray line you can see there. But we will see additional hydrogen demand coming from industries, coming from transport sector, right? And these sectors basically are the main off-takers for hydrogen, transport and industry. And especially, just to give you some numbers, especially for steel production, right? I want to produce steel, Hamburg, Bremen, for example, they have huge demands for hydrogen, right? So just to give you a feeling for the relation, so if you, I would say for one refueling station, you need roughly 1 to 2 megawatts electrolyzers. For the steel plant, you need roughly 2 gigawatts, right? So 2,000 megawatts for one steel plant. And we have, I think, 5 or 6 in Germany, right? So when steel is going towards decarbonization and green hydrogen, then you will see a dramatic increase in the demand, right? And actually, all of our projects right now are addressed for steel, basically. All right. Just to remember, first, so to break it down to 3 cases. So this is low case, base case, and high case. For the low case, we speak about, let's say, 50 terawatt hours of green hydrogen until 2030, which means we would roughly have the same amount of green hydrogen compared to gray hydrogen in the system, right? So we substitute, for example, in the summary, we substitute the gray with green hydrogen. That is the low case scenario, right? But as you can see, depending on the transition phase, it can be much higher, up to 150 terawatt hours, right? But just keep in mind, 50 terawatt hours is the baseline which we see in the system for gray hydrogen today, and that is the low case for green hydrogen in 2030, right? You will see the numbers later on for targets of the German government, and that's pretty interesting. So 50 terawatt hours, as I said, low case. So now the supply side, and I just mentioned that we have two options. So one is a domestic production and one is import, and it's for Germany. It's pretty clear that Germany is not able to produce the complete demand for green hydrogen by itself, right? So Germany today imports 70%, 70% of their energy from other countries, right? So 30% is produced within Germany, and 70% imported energy, right? And we think, and that is actually pretty clear, that we will, in the future, we will be dependent on these imports of energy, right? And the question is in which form we will import, right? Is it electricity, is it gas, is it coal? So when it comes to decarbonized imports, it's pretty clear hydrogen would be the best option, right? Electricity is pretty tough to import, but gas or something else is pretty easy to import. That's what we do today, right? So gas import probably will be the key. And when it comes to green or decarbonized energy carriers, then of course hydrogen would be, let's say, the first step after electricity to get energy for imports, right? So importing hydrogen, that is, I would say, one of the key aspects of the future energy supply for Germany. And by the way, as you might know, Japan started on hydrogen, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, and on the hydrogen, or the first hydrogen strategy from Japan actually had the target to make sure that they will have energy supply in the future, because Japan is basically 100% dependent on energy